So as Tanya said, today we're going to study the work of Geiger, Mirtha Dermisache, and Mira Schendel. Before I begin, I really want to ask you this question. Do you know any of these artists? And if you do, please say so, because I would love to know. Some of you know, raise your hands. Some of you know, maybe some of you know Mirtha because they're Argentinians, or Mira Schendel is actually very, very well known here in the UK. She had an exhibition at the Tate. But we're going to explore a subject that for me, I find very, very interesting, and is the relationship between language and art. So we see these three artists here exhibited. In the left, we see Mirtha Dermisache, in the middle, Geiger, and in the right, Mira Schendel. And my question, and this is a question that I want you to help me answer throughout the talk, is a written text an image? And how do images and work together when they are both present? Is an image a text? And these are questions that might sound obvious or not, but it's the key basis of communication and language. And partly the whole relationship between semiotics and linguistics, semiotics being the study of symbols that we can see as in a picture, and linguistics more language related to the written language, usually is being presented as two opposite things, or very distinct things, and how in the visual arts, and especially in the work of these three women, they correlate and they integrate each other. And conceptual art in the 60s started to essentially break away these tensions and becoming a work that is simultaneously linguistic and visual. And it's really interesting because this poses me another question that I want to ask you all, which is, what is the difference between drawing and writing? When I write, is my writing also a drawing or not? And a lot of people have tried to answer this question because it might seem obvious to a lot of people that might say, no, they're very distinct. But there are certain nuances that might not be the case. Tim Ingold wrote a book that I really awesomely recommend. Is this one. I'm not trying to do an advertisement, but it's really good. I have it in Spanish, and it's called The Brief History of Lines. I will add it to the reading list afterwards when you want to read about it. He said that he started to question the difference between drawing and writing, and he proposed 4 ways to distinguish them all. So firstly, he says writing implies notation. So it relates to certain types of notation that can be through words, that can be through notes, like as a part when you're writing music. And so it's specifically with notation. And again, I'm going to question this throughout the talk. Then drawing is considered an art, whether writing is not. And a lot of people, maybe writers, are going to say to me like, no, is writing not an art? Maybe it is, maybe we disagree. Probably you agree with me that it's also an art. Exactly, Gigi, calligraphy is a writing art. We will see a bit about like relationship with calligraphy throughout the presentation. He also proposes that writing is technology, whereas drawing is not. And this again relates with the concept and the notions of what is technology, what is the difference between art and technology, and then finally that writing is linear. And again, he questions that in his book, and at the end he disagrees with this particular statements, but in a very interesting way that we can see it throughout the work of these 3 artists. And we're going to start with the work of Geiger, as you see here, questioning a bit the power of the images. And there's a philosopher that is called Wittgenstein that says, and try to create and criticize the identity of language, and how does it serve us to communicate ideas? How do human beings manage to communicate ideas to one another? And in a way, language functions in a way that triggers an image in our mind. So when we read the word table, we imagine the word table, right? So in a way, the concept of an image and the concept of words are innately related, because when we read, we see images in our head. And he precisely says that the problem with communication is that the images that each of us have in our own minds might not be the same. And this is precisely when the problems with communication start. So how do we see this in the work of Annabella Geiger? And again, it's the tension that exists between semiotics and linguistics in her work. In this work, we see this two particular works that she developed. One is called Our Daily Bread, that she developed in 1978, which is a series of postcards. And I really find very interesting that her format are postcards, which are meant to be like souvenirs of your travels, for starters. And tell me in the chat, what else would you write a postcard? Postcard also relates to reproduction. It's the same image over and over again. And it questions a bit the notion of originality and authorship. Who is the owner of the postcard? Who is the owner of the image that lies behind? And she creates a series of postcards that it's relating to hunger and the situation of poverty in Brazil. As you see, once she eats the bread, she creates the layout of the map of Brazil. Then she then places in a basket of bread, and then she leaves the image of the empty and the void of Brazil there in the basket of bread, which makes us think how this image is actually, or it could be interpreted as a text, or be read as a text. I don't know if you will be able to agree with me or not, that for me, in a way, she's telling a story throughout this series of images, as if each one of those images would create words in turn that would allow us to be interpreted in our brains, creating new images in our brains, which makes it very complicated, but at the same time, it questions a bit how we communicate these very complex ideas. And especially with this famous saying that an image is worth 1,000 words, right? So how this text that she's telling us and how her way of relating to hunger and poverty in Brazil is in a way manifested or not in this picture. And similarly, she works in this other image that we see here that she called bureaucracy. And she was trying to make fun, or in a way create an allegory of an advertisement that was happening in Brazil for an ointment, where they hired women to pronounce the word and the syllables of the product very a bit condescending, because it was like 4 women, each one pronouncing the syllables of the products. And she created this parody with the word bureaucracy, in a way trying to criticize the commodification of art in Brazil, and how it's art being commodified. I'm just repeated myself, sorry about that. But basically what I want to say is, it's very interesting because in this book that I mentioned before, he questions when is the origin of writing. And I don't know if you know, like maybe someone in the chat can tell me, for you, when did writing start? We see certain pictograms and certain ways that writing has begun in history, but he mentions how in a particular culture, images became writing when pictograms, instead of trying to represent an object, instead of drawing a picture of a bird to represent a bird, represented sounds. So a few images were used, instead of representing an image or a concept, it was representing a sound to create a word. And that's way it started to evolve the concept of writing and language. So how she is relating with the same notions in this particular image, and how the voices of these women are trying to convey the same notion of bureaucracy. And we see the 4 women saying well, I'm not going to do that because I look very ridiculous, but in a way it makes us think about the origins of writing itself. And in her tension, we see the similarly in this other work that I found very interesting. Sorry about that. That is called Native Brazil and Alien Brazil. And in a way, this points to the fact of the criticize that Wittgenstein was trying to relate with language, which is precisely that each one of us have different images in our brain to what a word means. For certain people, certain words mean completely different ways or things that for us. And this is something that she criticizes in this particular image, as it's very interesting because she calls it Native Brazil and Alien Brazil. And I don't know if you see it, those are a series of postcards. Again, she's using the same technique where she's in a way making a parody of what people that goes to Brazil buys. So people that goes to Brazil and want to prove that they've been in Brazil, they would not necessarily buy an image of a building in Brazil, but they would buy an image of what they call the native Brazilians with their own and all their different traditions. And she questions this precisely because she's trying to question, okay, if they are the native people, what does that make me? If they are the ones that are from Brazil, who am I? Because she's clearly white. She is descended from Polish people that emigrated to Brazil, but she was born in Brazil. So for her, she is an alien. But again, she's questioning so many different concepts at the same time, because the concept of primitivism was a key essential part of the history of art in the world. And we see it very clearly in the history of European art, and how in the 19th century, primitivism was defined as a concept that it was very romanticized, and artists like Picasso and Gauguin went back to use this concept to try to frame a state of humanity that they wanted to go back to, an uncivilized state, very romantic state. And this is why, and I show you this and a similar image in a previous webinar, where in the universal exhibitions in the 19th century, at the end of the 19th century, they would bring native people from around the world, and they would exhibit them as if they were a zoo or a part of our, like, literally they were framed them in a cage, and people and native people were being displayed for the entertainment of the aristocracy in Europe. And this concept of primitivism and natives, and in a way has created and has shaped the way Latin American art has been understood as a pre-notion of art. And this has targeted how many Latin American artists have tried to move against that, or appropriate that from their own perspective. And in a similar way, what we discussed in a previous webinar with the work of Tarsila Amaral, and so on and so forth. What I find beautiful is that she's challenging this concept, and she's placing herself doing exactly the same postures that these native women are doing, but she's posting herself. So she's using, if it's a black and white photograph, she's posing and she's developing a black and white picture. And if it's a colored photograph, she's doing the same. It's very interesting because this work was exhibited at Tate Modern. I don't know if you can raise hands if you ever see it at the Tate. And for all the people that is living in London right now, I don't know if you ever saw this work at the Tate. And if you had, please raise my hand. I think it's not exhibited anymore. But it used to be exhibited until very recently. And it's very interesting because I took some people to go and see the work. And one Brazilian a student that went with me and saw it, and I want to point this out. This is the reason that I'm emphasizing this picture of this woman with the mirror, because she told me that for her, in I don't know if this is true or not, or if we have many Brazilian students here in this particular class, but she told me that when she was studying history, she was taught that colonialism was not a violent process in Latin America. And when she said that, I said, like, for me, it was like, how can you be being taught that colonialism was not violent in Latin America? And I said to her, like, how did they justify this? And she pointed out at the mirror, and she said that apparently what they are teaching students in Brazil is that because the Portuguese arrived with the mirror, the native people were so impressed by the mirror that basically they opened their doors and welcomed them and said to them, welcome, take our land because the mirror is so magical. Take everything that I have. And I found that very condescending. And this is very beautiful how, in a way, Annabella Geiger, she's showing that she can also see her reflection in a lake. Like, yes, the mirror is a wonderful tool, but it's not like they have never seen their reflection before. But honestly, it's a very challenging way of understanding history. And in a way, she's showing the problems with communication and how history has been told, especially in our countries. And she's doing a similar gesture with this series, this series of work that she did, a series of video. This is actually stills from a video that she's called Passages, maybe it could be translated from Portuguese, Passages, where she walks in different spaces in in Rio de Janeiro. And you see how this woman is walking from different corners to corners, floor after floor. She's trying to steadily ascend, and she, in a way, she's making a very complex idea of how women inhabit the public sphere, and how challenging it is for many women to ascend in our own social life and in our own professions, in our own ways of understanding ourselves. And she's always framing the picture from behind, always challenging this woman moving across the city and constant, and you can see the background. You have dogs barking in the background, a constant buzz of the traffic, and the artist is rising slowly in a way creating a symbol of the women's struggles throughout the city, and in a way the female struggle in general, in my perspective. But again, this makes me question the power of symbols and how each one of those images might represent something completely different from each one of us. And this is precisely the complexity of language, and we see it right now. It's very interesting how Wittgenstein, one of his first initial theories, is that an image allows us to see a fact. But then he created a second book where he says that language are tools to play certain games, and not all of us play the same game. Some people play the persuasion game, some people play the sympathy game. So I might be telling you something that might not be a fact because I'm playing a sympathy game or a seduction game or persuasion game. And he said the problem with communication is that you might be playing a completely different game that I might be playing. And so this is why we cannot understand each other, because for your side, you're trying to persuade me, and for my side, I'm trying to understand the fact. From my side, what you're saying is, oh, has something to do with facts? No. From your side, you might be altering the fact because you're trying to persuade me. So this is precisely the emphasis and the problem of communication, and the beauty of images as well. It's funny how when Wittgenstein started writing his first book, he started because he was reading in an article and how they tried to present a case. It was a legal case. And in that case, they used images to be able to describe the case. And it was better the way they did it, because for them, it was easier to convey the message through an image than on a written text. And again, it questions us the power of art, because that means that is it easier to really understand an image or not? And this becomes much more complex with the work of Mira Schendel. So Mira Schendel has a very interesting history. I don't know if the people that know her, Mira Schendel she was born in Switzerland, but she lived practically like the first part of her life in Italy. And she is descended from a Jewish father and a Catholic mother. And although she was raised Catholic, when all the National Socialist movements in Europe and the fascist movement in Italy started to occur, she started to be persecuted because of her Jewish background. So she had to migrate and leave Italy. And she ended up arriving to Brazil. And it's interesting because just like Ana Maria Maiolino, just like Geiger in Venezuela, she's considered a Brazilian artist, despite the fact that she was not born in Brazil. And it's really interesting because, again, she uses this particular sculpture that we see here is called droguinhas, or little nothings. I don't know whether or not I could call it a sculpture, because it's a series of knitting work where she's using paper that allows that in principle paper is one of the tools that is used in language to be able to write and communicate, but she's using to create certain spaces that are quite different. And it's really interesting because it makes me think, I don't know if it makes you think as well, of precisely what the Inca population was using to create their own particular way of codifying language. They developed something called a quipu that usually consisted of cotton and fiber strings, and that allowed them to record data, keeping records, monitoring text. And a lot of different artists have worked with this way of writing text in a way, and it's really interesting because it makes you think whether these knots are a form of writing techniques. Is something that, again, this author in this book questions, the relationship between line and a written text and a thread. And it's really interesting because here in this particular webinar today, I see one of the artists that we had the conversation the other day, Sophia, and we were discussing precisely, hi Sophia, yay, precisely this notion of writing with thread and the relationships between textile and text. And she was emphasizing the relationship with those two words, and how in Spanish, trama means literally the embroidery of two threads, but also it means the plot of a text. And we can see this, that she's going beyond the written text that is usually bidimensional, and she's transforming it into this three-dimensional sculpture that you can go around these thousands of knots and strings that are joined together in this beautiful sculpture. She makes it even more complex in this series of works that are called monotypes. And I wanted to point out a poem that was written by Haroldo de Campos about her work. And he says, "Is an art of voids where the utmost redundancy begins to produce original information, the art of words and quasi-words, where the graphic forms form veils and unveils, seals and unseals, studying semantic values, an art of constellated alphabets, of bee-like letters swarming and solitary, alpha bees, to enter the planetarium of her drawings, like starry patterns hangs, and hear the silence as the birds of inwards, as a perch of almost twittering its absolute haiku." And it's really interesting because if you see the series of pictures that she made in rice paper as well, a lot of people that might be unrelated to contemporary art might say this might be, they might not understand them. They might feel it's something that is beyond them, or might think, oh, this is just scribbles in a paper. This is something that people might do when they're thinking to themselves. And it's really interesting because as I mentioned at the beginning of the class, one of the things that Ingold said that was writing was lineal. And it's really, he points out of a certain tribe in Australia, I don't know if it's in Australia, sorry if I made that mistake, but a certain tribe that when they tell their stories, they draw in the sand. So they do a series of drawings in the sand that is very similar to something that we might do when we are listening to a class and we do certain scribbles in the text. But in a way, part of this telling of the story, part of el relato, is precisely of the drawing in the sand, and the gesture that it comes in a very bodily gesture because it requires your hand to move around the sand. And it relates a bit to what Gigi was saying before with Chinese calligraphy, precisely questioning this notion and the tension between art and technology, and whether or not drawing is merely art and writing is not, and whether or not writing is technology. And it's very interesting how the distinction between art and technology is very recent. If we go back in time, artists and craftsmen and artes y artesanos, they used to be the same thing. Craft and art was one and the same. And it was until capitalism arrived that they started to decompose skills and say technology is about method, system, and a series of repeated gestures, whereas art is more associated with the creative intelligence and imagination. Technology is associated, at the end of the day, with the machine, a series of repeated gestures that go over and over again. So the artist creates where the technology replicates. And this is where the distinction between writing and author arrives, where an author is the composer of text, and then the scribe is the one that copies the text. But again, this is questioned a bit with what Gigi mentioned before about Chinese calligraphy, something that Mira Schendel studied as well. And she studied that when teachers teach calligraphy to children, firstly, they teach the gesture in the air. So children first learn the gesture. Once they copy the gesture, they can transfer it to a paper. And then once they transfer into a paper, they have to forget what they learn and start over again in a way, because they have to create by themselves. And this is something that allows us a bit to understand this tension that she's explaining in her work. And she's showing us these gestures that we see, that if we try to see and read what she's writing, I really cannot understand what she's writing. We can point out certain words like Luna, Benedici, Signori, but certain words are illegible. I cannot understand. Sorry, I have a question here. Calligraphy choreography. I love that reference, Sophia. Absolutely. It's a dance. It's a dance that it's slightly questioned when we use machines, like typing machines. One of the questions that he poses that I wanted to question to you as well is that he says, at the end of the day, when we write, we are drawing, because our gesture of movement, it is a drawing itself. But a machine cannot draw. And I want to ask you this question. Do you think when we type in our machine and we produce a written text, but with a typer, is that a drawing or not? What do you think? Might say it's not, it is. We don't know. Well, this question, she starts to question this precisely with this particular work, where although she was not using a machine, she's using the certain letters that we can see written in a typewriter, and the way we type the certain letters in this text is very beautiful, because in a way she's questioning one of the questions that again he was posing in the text is, if you are copying a text that you don't understand from another language that you don't speak, does that mean that you're not writing? Does that mean that because you're not understanding what you're writing, because at the end of the day, words are there to produce concepts and images in your brain. If you don't have those images in your brain, does that mean that you're not writing? What is the act that you're doing? If you're writing in a different language, does that mean that you're not relating to that particular writing as such? And she's questioning that because also she's making this art, this writing three-dimensional. She's copying these images in both sides of the paper, and because of the translucency of the rice paper, you can see both from behind and both sides. The idea is for you to go around the exhibition and see it both sides. You see how the letters become fused in each other. And she might be not writing about anything. At the end of the day, as what we said at the beginning, writing is about notation. But a note, a letter, the letter A, doesn't mean a word, or does it? It relates, at the end of the day, what he says, an image is worth 1,000 words, no letters. So one thing is to write letters, and another thing is to write words that relate to the images in our brain. So what happens if you're not producing those images in your brain? What happens if what you're doing is just doing an act of notation and nothing else? And again, what is the basis and the concept and the essence of writing? And this question was precisely posed by Mira Schendel. Rice paper is, Tatiana says, rice paper is a misnomer. These are thin Asian papers, probably made from mulberry fiber. Thank you for that comment, Tatiana. So how would you call them? It's not, how would you call them, Tatiana? I think what she said is, so it's, if I understand you correctly, Tatiana, is that rice paper it shouldn't be called itself rice paper, or if it's made by another fiber. I don't know. I would have to come back to that in that particular question. But again, like coming back to what I was mentioning before, The question that we were posing, whether if you're writing something that you don't understand, is that act writing or simply drawing? And this is precisely what Mirtha Dermisache questioned in this particular book. She wrote a 500-page book of illegible writing. And it's really interesting because the idea, and for her, a lot of people at the time thought they were drawings. And because they thought they were drawing, they wanted them to be exhibited in a wall as a drawing. And they wanted to frame them and place them in a wall as a print. And she said, no, I don't want this to be a drawing. I want people to grab the book and actually read it. And have the act of reading, even if you don't understand what you're reading. And we need to understand why these three artists, I feel it's very important for me that they were placed in a very political context at the time. In the case of Mirtha Dermisache, and the further work that she was going to do further along the line, despite the fact that she clearly said, my work is not political, in the end of the day, her work became political because she was living in a time where it was a clear censorship in Argentina because of the dictatorship in Argentina. And at the end of the day, not being able to be read because you're being censored is similar to being illegible. And so at the end of the day, she questioned the tensions that she was using by not allowing other people to read and understand the meanings behind what she was reading. I'm going to read what Tatiana just mentioned about rice paper. She said rice paper is a misnomer. Oh, no, it's not a good term because it's not rice in it. It's considered offensive by a lot of people. Asians eat rice and thus is often called rice paper even though there is no rice in it. Oh, thank you, Tatiana. It's a good clarification. I would then research how to better name it. It's very interesting because wherever you read about Mira Schendel's work, it always says that the medium that she used was a drawing on rice paper. It's very interesting, and I will definitely take into consideration that note to research on that. Thank you for that comment. Coming back to Mirtha Dermisache, so precisely, she's questioning the relationship, the semiotic relationship with art and linguistics. And what is the essence of writing? If the essence of writing is not to communicate and to share an idea, but just the act, the urge to write and to share a message, what does that mean? And this is precisely what Roland Barthes said about her text. And further along the line, a group of poets and writers created a notion of what this type of writing is. And they named them a Semitic text. Asian people, okay, Tatiana, thank you. I'm just going along what Tatiana is typing. She says Asian paper is preferred now. Thanks for considering. So many museums still say rice paper. This is precisely what I was telling you. It's very funny how across the art world, wherever you read in museum galleries everywhere, the medium they always say is rice paper. But I will definitely research on that because it's a new line of research that I want to go forward into. But coming back to the work of Mirtha Dermisache, they said they named this type of writing an asemic text. And as you see this, she creates what she calls journals. And if you see the image, it's very interesting because it's an image that makes you think of a newspaper. It makes you think of the way a magazine or a newspaper is established with certain letters, but you try to read it and of course you don't understand because the point behind it all is to be illegible. And so they say asemic artists have in fact addressed familiar problems with mass production of media, newspapers, postcards. And I want to read to you precisely what they say about this particular text. An asemic text is when might be sorry, I want to read you the exact quote that they say about her work. And it's precisely, she said that she is there to create, Mirtha Dermisache says, all my work is to create some sort of tension between communication formats, offering a stable framework, and the act of writing, which provides the unstable dimension. What she wants to do at the end of the day is to convey this urge to write, to question the difference between art being a system of symbols and the written text to be symbols that convey an images in our brain and meaning. And this is precisely where she goes along the line with what Saussure said at the time, well, before, and that every alteration of the signifier means an alteration of the meaning. And this is precisely what she's looking at her text. And this is why someone like Roland Barthes, I don't know how to pronounce his name, wrote to her a letter glorifying her work. And he said, I will not only say how struck I am. He wrote this letter. I just copied. This is an image of the letter he wrote to her, to Mirtha Dermisache. And he said, I will only say how struck I am, not only by the remarkable quality of your lines, and that is not just a secondary question, but also indeed mostly by the extreme intelligence of the theoretical problems around writing that your work tackles. You have managed to produce a certain number of forms that are neither figurative nor abstract, forms that could be called illegible writing, which leads readers to formulate something that is neither a specific message nor a contingent form expression, but rather the idea, the essence of writing. And this is a question that I want to pose you. What do you think is the essence of writing? What lies behind writing an illegible text? If writing is there to communicate an idea, to communicate even an emotion, or just there to communicate, what happens if what you're communicating is not something that it's dependent, it's not universal, it's not like for her and for many people that have tried to understand her work have said like this is something that everybody could understand, because at the end of the day it becomes subjective. But if language is subjective, in a way defies the point of the language that is supposed to be it's supposed to create a community among us. It's supposed to allow us to become closer to each other. But again, she is writing. She is conveying a meaning. And so the people that write about asemic texts say precisely that even though it doesn't have a meaning, it has a signification. It is significant. And I love this tension and this play with word of the word significación, significant, meaning that in a way relate to each other, that it is significant, that is important, that conveys meaning, but that doesn't mean anything to you. So I want to pose this question for you, and whether or not do you think this is writing, and whether or not it conveys a message to you. For me, it does. But again, it's open to all of us, because at the end of the day, it implies a relationship with the sense and the innate meaning of communication that for me poses both Annabella Geiger and Mirtha Dermisache in one corner of each other, trying to question the same thing but in completely different ways. But at the end of the day, they are dialoguing with each other, one through images and one through images of written illegible text. And with that, I want to open to question, comments. And thank you, Tatiana, for this wonderful comment. I will definitely research about that. I find it beautiful because, again, most of the people that write about the work of Mira Schendel says medium is rice paper. Thank you so much. Thank you, Lulu. I understand completely what you just wrote, and this is a fine gesture.
Thank you, Daniela, for that talk. In the meantime, I don't know if I'm sure a lot of you have many questions and comments. As I told you at the beginning, I do encourage you to unmute yourself and have more of a discussion and conversation with Daniela. And before we end this session, I want to again thank everyone for joining tonight. Thank everyone for joining all of our episodes. And as you know, this is our last episode of the Isolation Inspiration series webinar. But we are working very hard as we will launch a new membership program where you will be able to access exclusive webinars and more. We will be having more classes and more dynamic sessions that we will announce very, very soon. And as you've been a part of this initiative and you've been joining to these webinars, you will receive an exclusive discount, and you will be the first ones to know about the new membership and the new classes that we will be giving in a couple of months. So
just a brief outline of what the courses will be. We will be launching 2 courses. One is a brief history of Latin American art in the 20th century. It will have, it's going to be more complex than this series of webinars that we're going to develop, because the idea is for us to have a lecture, but then a discussion is going to have handouts, reading material. So it's going to be more of a complex course. It's going to be 5 courses of 5 webinars in a way of Latin American art history, and then one of art and activism. That it will be 3 different classes again of studying activism in Latin American art. And we will love for you to join us. We will be sending you all the information throughout July, so you can join us and read more about the courses and the texts and the artists that we're going to explore in each one of them, of course. And because our purpose is to show the importance of women artists from Latin America, our main focus throughout all of those courses will be how Latin American art history can be read through the eyes of Latin American female artists. So with that, I open to questions, and again, thank you for being here. Gigi, hello. See you. Thank you for joining.
How expensive is a work of art of Mira Schendel now? Because I remember when I was, the first times I was in London, I went to see an exhibition of Mira Schendel, and it was really not at all expensive. And it was like 15 years ago, because as happened in art history, but mostly with women, we experience this problem that nobody really appreciate this kind of works of women that are on paper, you know, writing, and suddenly everybody discover the person. And I imagine that this exhibition that was took place, I remember in Marylebone in like 15 years ago. It was like one of the first ones, and then suddenly she was discovered. The same as happened with Carmen Herrera or some other artists. So this is incredible. I can imagine that Mira Schendel is now like it goes very high, and if I could go back to those days and have more money, because I wanted to buy something from her, but it was so beautiful, because it was, you could see those like in the tape, but at that time the exhibition was exquisite, like it was on both sides. Beautiful, yeah. So they were hanging like from both sides, and it was sometimes more beautiful. Well, we didn't know which one was the correct way to see the art.
Absolutely. I think this is one of her biggest qualities in my perspective, that she makes a sculpture. At the end of the day, I feel like these papers are a sculpture, because it requires a performative act from the viewer to not only see it from one side, to see it from both sides. It doesn't have the right sides or the wrong sides, and in a way it has to be read from both sides, precisely because it's translucent. It filters the images, so you can read them from both sides, and it creates something three-dimensional. That is something that I forgot to mention in the class, but precisely one of the things that questions about the relationship between writing and drawing, it's etching. etching was originally made into this one of these technological things that was put aside behind what was not art, because there were a series of writers, especially here in the UK, that said, no, etching is copying, and copying does not require creative endeavor, which I disagree, but it was kind of condescending. And this is when they started to create this tension or this division between craftsmen and artists. And for many years, the Royal Academy of Arts did not allow etchings, well, or this type of graphical arts in their exhibitions. Then they started to realize there is creative endeavors behind etchings. And in a way, it makes you think, because at the end of the day, an etching, it requires an engraving, that it requires an active three-dimensional space. It's no longer bidimensional. It has an object behind. And this is precisely what I love about her installations of words that are three-dimensional, and it requires also a gesture from the viewer that is not just looking, but is moving to look, which I find very beautiful. We have a Royal Academician here in the call. Thank you, Sophia.
Hi, Daniela.
Hi.
Maria here. Hi. I just wanted to ask, it's amazing work that I didn't really know. And I just wonder, because she's obviously working in Brazil, how was the connection with the, all the concrete poets? Did she take part on that movement? Or?
Absolutely. Absolutely, and thank you for reminding me. This is something that I also wanted to say, but for some reason I forgot to mention, and it's precisely her relationship with the concrete artist. And it's really interesting because at the end of the day, her relationship with the concrete artist was a very similar relationship to the one that Ana Maria Maiolino had, because at the end of the day, she was an immigrant. So I don't know how much they embraced her as a Brazilian artist. This is something that I really don't know. But what I do know is precisely this tension, that precisely this is the question that the concrete artist and the concrete poets created, which is, can a machine draw? And they did. They proved that they did, because they created drawings of machines.
With typewriters.
Exactly. And I think precisely, I don't think it's a coincidence that she started to develop this line of work in a very similar time that they developed. A few years later, this is in 1967, when a lot of these concrete artists started to move away from their perspective because of the dictatorship in Brazil. But I think it's precisely one of the reasons that made her work very significant, because she was developing this during the dictatorship. And at the end of the day, just like with Mirtha Dermisache, her work becomes political, even if it wasn't meant to be political, but it becomes, because precisely she's addressing all the tensions that is created by censorship and the dictatorship in Brazil. So thank you for reminding me that, because absolutely there was a relationship there with Mira Schendel and the concrete artists in Brazil.
Well, you know that, I don't know if you know, but there is also a whole new field. Well, it's been now for a few years, but it's electronic literature. Are you familiar with it?
Electronic literature? No, I want to research.
Oh, well, I have to introduce you to it.
Hold on, I need to write it down in a piece of paper, otherwise I will forget.
And electronic poetry.
Wow, incredible.
I wrote my PhD thesis in 2000 or something like that. Yeah, a long time ago now. And it was on electronic poetry, and it didn't exist anything like that. When I was doing the work, it was like we didn't even know how to call it. But I was making work with new technology. I was envisaging what the new language and communication system and everything, the mixture of the image and the sound and the text, everything was going to come together with also the new tools. And so, but I was basing my work very much on concrete poets and poesía visual, visual poetry, and from different countries and everything. But it's this kind of transfer from the print then into the new, the electronic and the digital. So yeah, so I think you'll be interested in that.
Absolutely. Please send me your thesis if you don't mind. I would love to read it.
Yeah. I can put in there a website of my work in there. I don't work
Absolutely.
as well because I'm from Spain, but I was born in Venezuela, and so I'm a mixture of, and I got some work, that is connected to Chile, and recently I just done a project on about Colombia as well.
Absolutely.
And
Incredible.
so I'll give you, I will put a couple of links or something, so you can see, what this is about. But one is called The Poem That Crossed the Atlantic,
Mhm.
and it's connected to Neruda, but also all the refugees that moved from Spain to Chile. And in connection, and it was my grandfather. I found him online. So then I did this work. I didn't know he had gone in that boat. But this is all with, working with the technology and the text and the image and that poetic space that
Amazing.
everything creates, so it's about the aesthetics of the poetics, and are you reading it or are you looking at it? And it's the experience, isn't it, as well of that. So
Absolutely. I think it's inevitable that now the new
but anyway,
technologies
yeah, so
is questioning. New technologies is definitely something that baffles me, how it's going to question our relationship with art, and especially AI, artificial intelligence, and how they and an AI can create. So does that make him an artist? Or
yeah.
is it technology? I don't know. If you don't mind, if you like, I would love to have your thesis definitely, and we can share it with the students here in the class as well.
Oh yeah, where, in which place?
So I'm gonna leave the email. You can send this to info@amalgama.com. I'll just put in,
Okay.
Yes, in
in
there,
the chat.
okay. And so where are you now teaching? Where is this, where are the students
No,
that you're
with this
talking about?
class, I mean, like
This
if
class.
the people that connected today want to hear about it, then
Okay,
we'll definitely share them with you.
yeah. No, it's great. I've been attending your classes.
Thank you.
It was great. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Sorry, are you finished? Yeah. Hello.
Thank-
Hi.
Hi, I don't see you.
It's
I
Luke.
I don't see. Hello. I see you. I see you. Sorry.
So I'd like to go back to what you were saying about the screen, the image that's up, and that you can walk around it, and you thought it was maybe like space.
I'm going to hold on a minute. Tanya, can you mute Gigi? There you go.
So what came up for me when you said that was I was thinking about the way that the artists broaden the way that we experience art. So if you have a painting with no writing, you would view it. But the minute you put letters and writing or script, you start to read it. So we've pushed the boundaries of art to allow people the idea of reading art. So that then when you go back to looking at paintings, having had an experience of this, you now have the idea of reading it. So you don't just become a viewer, but you become a reader. And that takes you to a very different experience of appreciating some communication. And I think there's also, when you look at the work visually, you're looking at space, mark making, rhythm, line, it's all of those ingredients. But I just think this work pushed the boundaries to open our perspective to a different way to interact and even with the self at the end of the day. So you're having a new experience.
Absolutely. I agree. I agree. Although I also think that even an image you can read, which is something that I wanted to point out with the work of Geiger, and how images, at the end of the day, this is the key of language, that words create images in our brain, right? What happens if what you're seeing are words? What are the images that are creating in our brain? And what happens, more importantly, what you were saying is, what happens if we're not seeing words, we're just seeing letters? What are we reading? What are the images that are creating, and how do we relate to them? which is precisely the question of notation and how do we relate to that. And it also makes me think, when you see a text in another language, that in a way you can read it, although you don't understand it.
It becomes a sound code.
Exactly.
It's a sound code which has a frequency and a vibration. So I think it does strip it all back to the essence, which is sound, frequency, vibration. It strips us all back.
Absolutely. And this relationship with sound is beautiful, precisely because in a way this is where they point out the beginning of writing, different than pictograms. Pictograms were not just representing an images like hieroglyphs, but like an object, but they were representing sounds, precisely.
They say in the Bible, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and that's the sound. So it's stripping. All of this is, to me, is stripping back.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. It's like when you relate to it with the essence in a way of writing, which is the letter, the word, and the sound, precisely. When you see this work, you in your brain, maybe you don't have an image, is what you just said, you have a sound. So you have the sound of ah in your brain rather than an image, because you're watching the image of an A. So this is a beautiful thing that you just make, like, I just realized with what you said. Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thank you for a wonderful talk.
Hi.
Hi. Hi, Sophie.
Hi. Oh, I love this lecture. It's so good. Like so many interesting things. And actually, Lulu, I love what you just said, and I love how actually similar to what Daniela also said. Like rather than, or like as well as reading art, it's also about visualizing letters or making letters into art themselves. And it's in this way, with this philosophy of how we image language in our brain, it's almost like every one of these artists that you showed is trying to make that image in their brain of language visual through their work. And I mean, that's what I love about any artist, you know, like figuring out what their language is, like what's in their minds. Actually, Dani, I had a question, because I love seeing all these talks so far, and I was wondering, how did you maybe specifically for this one, how did you figure out these three artists and this one topic? Like, did you start with a topic and then you have a few artists, or do you research artists and then you find a topic? Or like, are there also like other artists that were related to this topic that you found in your research? Because I would love to like know more. Like, I love that Tim Ingold book also.
Oh yes, it's wonderful. I need to read it again, because yeah, absolutely. I think it's a mixture of both. I researched the artist and the subject. I'm really interested in language, and when we had this conversation with you, like I don't know if I want to introduce you all to the work of Sophia, because one of the things that she made with certain tools, part of her work is tools, and the limitation of gesture as well, because part of like the limitation of how much can the hand go by, and this what you were saying about choreography and calligraphy, and how initially this drawing act require a movement from your body that makes it very complex nowadays, that we're writing here and that the movement is just tick 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 from our fingers. So what happens to the gesture and the drawing? It's beautiful, because reading about the Chinese calligraphy, they said that precisely they were not just writing, but they were copying the movements that they were seeing in nature. So if they were writing about waves, their movement would copy the movement of nature, which is something that I found beautiful. I did encounter other artists in my research that work with words, and I might just add them into the suggestions when we send you the link. Because of course there have been a lot of artists that have worked with this. For example, what the Mirtha Dermisache did with asemic writing, and artists that are writing and drawing illegible text, and what does that mean? And not just women but men. So I will share with you the men.
Yeah, well, how did you spell that? Asemic. Writing.
Asemic. Let me write it in the chat. Asemic.
Also, you had said a quote that was alembic.
No, alembic. No. Why did it say asemic? I'm sorry, it says asemic. Alembic. No, I don't know why it said that.
You had said a quote on like before the Roland Barthes.
Yes, I will send you if you want. I can send you like the quotes about like there's this series of poets that actually created this theory of asemic writing, of writing illegible text. Actually, I wanted to, now that I'm here, I want to share you this book. You will love. Hold on a minute. Have you seen this?
Your image is frozen.
My image is frozen.
Ah, okay, there. Oh, yeah.
Oh,
It's
that's a
called,
big.
Yeah. No,
so Mira,
nice. Oh.
this person is writing an illegible book, but he's making like a treaty of drawings. This is beautiful, Sophia. You will love it. I will send you this book. Let me stop the screen so you can maybe see it bigger. Let me see what I can do. So stop screen share.
Oh, okay.
So maybe you can see it better.
Yeah.
So this person writes and draws, but all this text is illegible. It's like scribbles that they look like language, and you try to read them. So it's a beautiful experience of the book because he has certain drawings that allows you to see like, oh, this means something. And he's adding like something like, oh, this is the name of this weird thing is this, and then you will read the description, but everything is illegible. I really do recommend it. This was one of my birthday presents one day, and I really do. It's called Codex Serafinianus by an Italian artist called Luigi Serafini. Let me write it in the chat so you can. Codex Serafinianus. Luigi Serafini. Voila.
I also wanted to say, because we were talking earlier about the origin of writing, and like I've been studying a lot, like this relationship between text and textiles, and especially weaving. And I've been researching a lot about how actually like weaving comes before writing, and a lot of the things about weaving and textiles have informed writing and have also informed the surfaces. Like even when we were talking about paper, but like papyrus, for example, that it's made actually in like a weaving sort of structure.
Yeah.
But even we were talking about hieroglyphics, and that's something that would be used in weavings. Like there were specific symbols passed on from generation to generation, or in order to like tell stories in a piece of textile. So like from that, it grows into eventually writing. And before there were writing tools like ink and paper, there was textiles, and women would write messages in textiles. And I love that also weaving has always been a woman's craft, and I love to think that it is women that came up with writing.
Yeah.
So I love seeing all these three women artists today and seeing how they think of writing and how they can come up with their own language or how to visualize their words.
Absolutely. It's something that I do want to research more, is the origins of weaving, and definitely its relationship with writing, especially in the Peruvian.
I was just gonna say.
Yeah.
I think the Incas, they used to write in their weavings messages to be carried through the mountains when the Spanish were coming to conquer. So they would pass messages through the weavings in code language.
Well, yeah, they were doing with knots. At the end of the day, it's not writing. It's creating like series of knots that allows them to keep records at the end of the day, which is the origin of why it was needed to write, to keep records, do notations of records in general, which I find Very interesting. There's something also very interesting that I want to research. There's this Colombian artist, I forgot her name, but give me a second and I will find out, that she studied how in African slaves in Colombia, they would create maps by weaving the hair, like with braids. So the maps would be in the head, that way they would know how to move and how to. So the name of this artist, if you wait for me a minute, is, well, give me a second and I'll find it for you in a second. But it's a Colombian artist that she studies precisely this weaving, that at the end of the day, is she writing? I don't know. She's weaving the map in the head, a cartography of the hair, which is beautiful. Absolutely. Her name is well, I will send to you when I send you the link of the recording, so I can give you the correct name. But thank you. If you have any.
Carmen Mariscal send the comment.
Telling their own stories. Yes, in Los Altos, in Chiapas, Mexico, the designs of women clothes tell their own stories. This is something that I find very, very beautiful also in Colombia, with the Gunadule tribe, that their drawings are images. Yes, they are images, but they tell the stories and their political resistance in their clothes. And it's also something like, again, with this relationship with writing and image, and how to convey a message, which is something very, very beautiful. I have some Islamic work, Lulu. Wonderful. Thank you. I'm saving all the notes in the chat, so we can save each other and share with you each other in the links as well. Thank you so much. I don't know if you have any other questions, comments. If not, we will hope to see you. We will send you the information about our new courses. Our idea is to create several courses of Latin American art history from the point of view of women artists. And definitely there are many more artists to discover. Every time I discover new, there's a saying every time. When I started researching about Latin American, women artists in general, are the courses going to be online? Yes, but there's a sad disclaimer for the people that live in London. When things open up, our idea is also to take it a bit more live and go to the actual places and museums where you can see some of the work. Like, as I mentioned, for example, the work of Annabella Geiger was exhibited in the 10, no longer, but for example, her current work of the bread is currently exhibited at the Tate. So hopefully we will be able to go and see some artworks displayed, hopefully. But at the beginning, yes, it's going to be online. It all depends on how the situation progresses. But yes, our idea is to, like, it was funny because when I started researching about this artist, one of the questions that I posed myself is why, I didn't know so many of these artists. And I had to admit to myself a horrible truth, is that at the beginning I thought maybe they're not so good. And then I bathed myself with this terrible lie that it wasn't not that they were not so good, it was my main ignorance. And of course, they are a wonderful group of artists that I discover every day. They were invisible throughout their whole lives and very cheap, as you said, Gigi. And this is why I know that we will progressively make women worth what they should be worth. And their artworks, I know most of you are most of you artists? Most of you are, no?
Yeah.
Our idea is also to share the information with the non-artistic community, but at the beginning, at least if we can start with each other and see each other's work, this is a great step towards that. We can contribute to each other's research, which is really good. And so yeah, thank you so much.
That's great.
I don't know if anyone else has another question or comment, but I do want to remind you that we have all the recordings of the webinars that we have during this 3 months. So if you miss one, go ahead to our website. I send it in the chat. And also, we will upload this recording during next week, and we will share the link with you. And to remind you and ask you again to please follow us on our social media and share our content with in your social media channels, please. And thank you again for joining the last episode of this webinar Isolation Inspiration series. We really appreciate all the support and all the positive feedback we have from everyone.
And the debate. Yeah. Thank you so much. It was hot.
Thank you.
Thank you for doing this. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.